see how well the ABS works. Definitely works. Very nice. All right, so what we're gonna do today is do an alignment on this car, because while it tracks straight, you'll notice that the steering wheel is slightly off center when going straight. But there's one extra thing we have to do before we can even attempt an alignment on this car, and that's deal with the saggy rear end. So pretty much all E46 wagons that develop this sagging rear end, because the wagon is just heavier than the sedan, although the springs aren't that much stronger than the sedan springs. So over here, sitting shotgun, is a box of brand new springs. All right, so I'm going down a pretty steep hill here. I'm gonna give this hill descent control function a try. And oh my God, the engine braking is ridiculous. If I let off the throttle, look at that. It puts so much engine braking into this that it's like hitting the brakes. I mean, that's kind of cool, but in a situation where you've got kind of an icy road like this, that might not be super great. I don't actually know if it's actually using the engine to slow you down or if it is in fact engaging the brakes. Look at that. It's almost as if that's the ABS engaging. It's a really cool function though. That's crazy. Okay, let's turn off the traction control. Here's a nice open parking lot. All right, enough playing around. Let's get this thing into the shop. You've probably noticed this in previous videos, especially if you know E46s, you know all their common faults. You've probably noticed that the back end of this wagon is drooped down quite a bit. In fact, probably 2 inches too low, and I'm not going off a low rider on this thing, so something's definitely up with that rear suspension, and likely it's just fatigue springs. I don't think they're actually snapped or broken spring coils, because I've been in there and looked at them, nothing looked like it was broken. I think they're just worn out. So both sides drooping about the same amount. That just means they're the same age. They just need to be replaced. So the reason I'm going to replace these springs before doing an alignment is because anytime you change ride height, it alters the suspension's geometry, meaning it changes camber and toe, which is exactly what you adjust when you do an alignment. So there's no reason to do an alignment while you have an incorrect ride height. These are OEM direct replacements for the wagon. I can't pronounce the manufacturer, but they are a reputable company, and there they are. Now supposedly these are shorter when they're in the uncompressed state, because they use a constant diameter spring throughout. So I'm sure when we take the ones off of here, we'll notice that at the top and the bottom, it kind of tapers down into a thinner spring. And this is supposedly the permanent retrofit. This shouldn't ever really degrade like the original ones, because it has a constant spring thickness or diameter all throughout. So this is supposedly a good upgrade, and one that will keep the ride height for a long time to come. Now you'll notice also in this box I've picked up a new Strut top mount. Now in the previous video I only changed the passenger side for the front strut. Here's one for the driver's side. I only changed one because I ran out of time, and Napa only had one in stock, so I picked this up online for even cheaper than I could get it locally. All right, let's get this car on the lift and check out those rear springs. Just look at how nasty that spring looks. It's very rusty, but again, it doesn't look like it's broken. So I've got this hydraulic jack underneath the swing arm so that when we pull out the shock bolt, that's really the only thing keeping the whole swing arm from drooping down. That way it doesn't just spring out. I don't really know how much preload that's under, but I just want to be sure that it doesn't spring out uncontrolled. Here's the other side. Looks about the same. Again, doesn't look broken to me. Just looks heavily fatigued. All right, so the bolt is out of that shock, and this is in full droop, but it's not quite enough to get the spring out. So we're gonna use this pry bar right here, stick it in there, and pull that spring out. At least that's how I'm gonna try to do it initially. I take my wheels off the car for like 10 minutes. I turn around and they're gone. It's been mounted to Jeremy's Ferrari project over here. I don't know what he's trying to do, make some like early 90s supercar. I mean, that kind of what it looks like. What'd you say it looked like?
Yeah, well, it looks trashy, but...
I don't know.
That's not what it looks like.
I don't know. That gray fender might be doing that. I just can't tell at this point, but.
Yeah, the nearly 15-inch rotor fits pretty good inside the 16-inch wheel.
Oh yeah, that's just a little bit of clearance problems. Not much. You can just easily put a caliper behind there.
Two-piece caliper to fit in there.
Mm-hmm.
Bluetooth
caliper.
Bluetooth the outside of the clamping force.
Yeah. All right, so we got the old spring out of here, and thankfully Jeremy is here because this kind of turned into a two-person job, putting leverage on the control arm to make it drop low enough to pull the spring out. You can't just pull it out by even undoing the sway bar link, which I had to do as well. You really have to put a lot of force on a long pry bar like this and pull down and then go in there and grab the spring. So I don't know how people are doing this. One person, maybe if the car's on the ground, you get a little bit better leverage, but anyway, got the spring out. Comparing it to the new one, be able to see that without any weight on them, they're about the same height. What I'm wondering is maybe the original springs had snapped and they got replaced with possibly a sedan springs that are not quite as strong enough to hold up the back of a wagon. So we will find out when we put these new ones in. I'll just swap over these pads and stick those into the spot. So those are the new springs installed. Now remember, if you're gonna do this, you have to disconnect that sway bar end link. You also want to make sure you pay attention to direction of the spring pad, so the cone part is on the bottom. I made the mistake on the first time I installed this, put it in upside down. It's a lot harder to put it in, let me tell you that. So just make sure you get the pads in the right orientation. Well, that is both springs replaced, looking much better. Now I've got to reconnect the shocks and the sway bar end links. The shocks are now bolted to the rear carriers. Sway bar end links are mounted, so now the suspension is all back together. All right, now I'm going to replace the driver's side front strut mount. So at the top of it, you can actually see in the rubber portion a lot of cracking around the perimeter, but mainly the bearing starts getting loose and makes a knocking noise in the front. Now I've replaced the passenger side one in a previous video just because I had the strut out to get the CV axle replaced, so I just went ahead and replaced it. I didn't have an extra strut mount for the driver's side at the time, but now I do have one, so we're going to replace that. Then once that's in there, we can perform the alignment. Now, I did learn my lesson from the last time I pulled out the strut on this, and that's that I'm not going to touch this strut clamp bolt right there. In fact, you can see this one's got a through bolt on it with a nut on the end of it, so I wonder if someone's already been in there and replaced that before. What I'm going to start with is removing this axle nut so I can pull out the CV axle, but before you can pull the CV axle out, I'm going to remove this tie rod end and then disconnect the lower ball joint. When you remove the tie rod end, you give the ball joint separator full access to that lower ball joint, so it should work pretty well. You also need to disconnect the sway bar end links and disconnect the caliper from the caliper bracket, but those are pretty easy things. So let's get started. And here is the driver's strut out of the car, and the strut mount is a bit wobbly. Even a little bit of play like that will transmit through the body as you go over bumps and sound like something's seriously wrong. So this, you know, it would have lasted a while, but since we're here, let's go ahead and take care of it. The bigger problem is as you turn it radially like that, the bearing doesn't feel very healthy. A lot of notchiness in it, and surprisingly that will be transmitted through the steering wheel. Next, I'm going to put the spring compressor on this and get that mount off. You can see with that cap removed that the bearing is looking very dried out. And that is what kills a strut mount. As all that grease pushes out, heck, there's even leaves inside of that. So even though you have a cap on there, it's not sealed completely. So it's another reason to keep your engine bay clean. This is an original BMW one, so likely this has never been replaced in the car's life. Look how compressed that is. So I've got a new one here, my socks. Look at the height difference. So this bearing, super smooth. Make sure we transfer this, but look at that. Not so much. Definitely time to have this replaced. You can see that the top is starting to separate there in the actual bushing portion of this. And that is an incredible difference in height. Definitely time to replace. It's interesting how this doesn't have that centering pin anymore. But we want to make sure we swap this little cover over, and we get this put on. So much smoother. Alright, so I've got that tightened down, and whew, that's why these spring compressors are dangerous. That one just slipped. Obviously, it's so much smoother, and then we don't have that play anymore. So the springs on these front struts are really strange. They're not perfectly like cylindrical. They like oblong at the bottom. So I had to mess around with this, use some silicone spray to move this pad so it was correctly positioned on the bottom of the strut, and also move the spring so it was in the right position on the pad. So if you're not paying attention, you could easily get these things out of alignment with one another, and it could possibly change the front ride height if it's not perfectly aligned. So just pay attention to that, take pictures before you take it apart so you know how it's supposed to look when it goes back together. So I will say that regular spring compressors like I use, since this spring is just strangely shaped, 2 of them sometimes isn't enough to get this compressed enough to get this all configured right, get the tension off it so that you can actually move things around like the spring pad. So I had another set of spring compressors, so I ended up using 4 to properly get everything fixed down there. So just keep that in mind if you're taking on a job like this. All right, now I'm gonna put this back in the car. I'm not going to video putting it back in because it's just the same as taking it out. We'll see you guys on the other side. Everything is now bolted back up into place. Goes a lot faster on reassembly than disassembly because you're not fighting corrosion and rust the whole way, but looks pretty nice now. And if we look up top, it looks really nice. So both strut mounts are now replaced, brand new rubber and bearings, and it should get rid of the remaining noises coming from the front end. So all I got to do now is put the wheel back on, and then we can do an alignment. Wheels are back on the back, and now I've got the wheel alignment sensors on and the stands underneath the wheels, and I'm about to see what the alignment's sitting at right now.
Your toe's pretty far off.
Now, what's the spec on the toe?
I bet it's
0?
No, I doubt it's 0.
0.0.
0.13 degrees. Pretty
Wow.
typical for BMWs.
So overall, alignment's pretty far off, especially in the front. The toe in It's a little off.
Yeah, you're definitely a little off on that, for sure.
The steering.
I bet it's roughly 0.06, yeah, 0.05. Yeah. This one's had an alignment on it sometime in the last
20 years.
23 years or so.
This is how you adjust the toe in the rear. You move these little plates, which are held in by fairly large 18mm bolts. Less chance to go tight to extremely loosey-loosey in one fell swoop. That's one side. So they're loose.
Yep.
Does that necessarily mean it'll move?
I've never found one not move after it's loosened up, so
That's good.
that's at least good.
Those are positive words from the expert. So we have this little box that is below the actual alignment screen, so you can see the alignment while you're under the car. It tells you where you're at.
Now comes the hard part, getting it to actually settle into the right spot and tightening it back up again while we work on the other side, because the other side can make...
Now we can see it's 0.022 now, so now it's way too much. And put the camera down here so I can tighten it while he's moving it. You can see that we got the right side in the green now. We're trying to get the left side in the green.
So now the toe is good. You want to decide whether or not you're going to change the camber on the other side. This one's good over here now that we've got the toe in the back side, but camber on the passenger side.
Give the camber just a quick shot, see if it can be loosened. So that's the camber bolt right there. Let's see if we can adjust it. Well, we decided to leave that camber bolt alone back there. It was very tight, and the last thing I want to do is break it off and render the car almost unusable until we get a new one. We can see that the important part, the thrust angle, is now dead on, so we're good to go in the rear. So by changing the rear toe in, we've actually affected the front toe in, and we can see that the right side is now dead on, but the left side is really off. So we're gonna adjust that next. We're almost there.
Getting there.
So we're basically pushing the wheel outward by spinning this. There we are, we're dead on. Now we tighten it up. All right, so that is the car pretty much all aligned. It's not completely perfect because some of the things we just couldn't adjust. They're too rusty, and we'll maybe revisit that another day. But it should drive straight, steering wheel should be straight, and it should be good to go. Thank you, Jeremy.
You're welcome.
With the alignment done, that wraps up this video. We'll catch you again next time. We'll be back in my garage where we start taking on some of the more cosmetic related fixes. Until then, we'll see you guys again next time.